All right, so I wanted to try to do another little React challenge for anyone who wants to learn more about React and practice their React skills. I had an idea of like, can we kind of stress the understanding of data structures and how to like render out arrays and kind of modify those arrays in React? So the idea is, the challenge is, can you, if given some type of structure like this, can you render this out to the page? And if a user were to click in between one of these elements, and they actually click, can you add a new element so that they can then type in some information? And then after they keep on doing that, they can keep on like expanding and inserting in between these things, or they can go to like maybe the left and the right in either a pinned or pre-pinned information. After they've kind of set up that entire string or an array of objects, can you click a button to have them all join together and print out the final string, the page somewhere? So, I mean, I think this is a pretty entry level thing. It might just take a little bit of brain power to like figure out how to do some of this stuff and kind of think outside the box of like, how do I listen for click events within this area right here? But let's just try solving this and let's see if we can break it down into smaller steps so it's easy to solve. So I have a Vite application set up, and I'm going to go ahead and just try to start coding this. So the first thing I want to do is let's just try to build out this, right? Let's just build out 3 boxes, and let's use state to render those out. So I'm gonna go ahead and just say like, what I'm gonna call these cells. So I'll say set cells equals use state, and we want this to be an array. And again, I think these are strings, so we could say like A, B, C. Okay, pretty straightforward. And I want to render those out to the page dynamically. So I'm going to say cells.map, and then for every cell that we have, I want to render out some new HTML. So in our case, I'll just put a div, and I will close that div off, and I will give this a class name of cell. All right. And on the app CSS, we're just going to go ahead and do our styling here. I think this is like pulled over from another project, so there might be a lot of like old CSS, but it's fine. Let's just do the cell here. And what do we need to do? Well, we want to, first of all, let's save. Let's make sure that we actually can display the information. Like, do we get ABC rendered to the screen? If we go over here, I think it, let's look and see what's going on. It looks like it's crashing for some reason. Use state is not defined. So when you're doing like a live coding session, you're going to run into bugs probably. And it's always good to have this terminal open. And after you make a change, just save your file and go to the UI and make sure nothing's broken. Because if you keep on adding code here, it makes it even more and more difficult to like figure out what did I add that broke my application. So in our case, it's saying use state is not defined. I don't understand why this isn't highlighted red. It's probably because I'm using JavaScript instead of TypeScript for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and just rename this to TypeScript, so that you actually get information. This is one good reason why you should use TypeScript. It literally tells you I'm doing something wrong, so that I don't waste that extra minute going to the UI and seeing that I've done something wrong. All right, so we got ABC displaying to the page here. And another error that prints out at the bottom is this key thing. Again, try to address your errors, which we could probably just, use the index for right now. But you should probably explain why using the index is not a good idea. You should actually probably use like a unique identifier on these things, which we'll refactor in a little bit. All right, let's just continue on. I feel like I'm talking and not making progress. So how do we style this thing? Remember, the page that we're going for, the look we're going for, has like rectangle boxes with outlines. So how do you do that in CSS? Well, let's go back and let's try that out. So I'm going to go ahead and say border 1 pixel solid white. And that should add a border around these things. But how do you make the rounded edges? Well, I'm going to say border radius, and I will say, let's just do 10 pixels, right? The more pixels you add, the more rounded it'll be on the edges. But we should also probably give this like a height and a width so that it has some type of like, stuff inside. There we go. Cool. So now how do you actually have them be next to each other? Like right now, they're kind of spaced out. Is that what we want? I'm not really sure, but I think it's because this thing is inside of a Flex container, and this has like probably a gap on it. Yeah, it has a gap. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to wrap this thing in another div called cells. You could also just do a section here if you want to say that you know semantic HTML. And this could be called like main if you really want to take it to the next level or something. There we have it. So let's go back here. And then for cells itself, we could style anything if we wanted to. In our case, I don't think we need to. Actually, we do. So since I wrapped this in a new div, the way the children are going to lay out by default is going to be, block style. But we're going to have to change this display of the parent to flex so that they're all aligned left to right. So this is looking a lot closer to the picture, but now there's an issue. How do I get these things in the center of every cell? Well, if you're familiar with Flexbox, you can do that. So I'm going to say display a flex on the cell itself. And then there's two properties you can use to align vertically and horizontally. So there's justify content center, and that's going to push the content to the center. Notice that's right in the middle now. But how do we get it to be vertically aligned in the middle? Well, there's another thing you should learn called align items center, and that's going to push it vertically inside the div. So cool. We centered a element, we centered a div, whatever. People say it's a lot harder than it is, but it's really super easy with Flexbox. Now's the juicy part of this problem. How do you make it so when you hover over, let's say this, and you click, how do you have it add a new cell? Also, how do we make it so we can modify these things? So to me, if you're a beginner, I would just focus on the easiest thing first. What is the easiest thing? It's probably going to be like, if I click on this, I can modify it. Because right now when I click on it, I can't change it. So how do I do that? Well, you could probably just use an input box instead of a div here, right? So instead of just saying cell, I'm going to say input. The value is going to be cell. And I should be able to now type and change what the value is. Actually, I can't do that yet because I need to add an onChange listener. So let's go and add an onChange, and I'll just call it like change cell content. Like that. And let's just go ahead and make a function here called change cell content. And we're going to pass an E, and that's going to be a react dot. I don't remember what it's called. It's called I always forget this. If you hover over on change, it'll be an HTML input element. So I'll say, I think it's a change event, and then I can say HTML input element like this. Okay. Anyway, that'll give us access to e.currentTarget.value. You could also just do it here if you wanted to. I'll just do E. This might be easier sometimes. I'm just say e.currentTarget.value. Okay. And then we're just going to pass in, instead of doing this, I want to just pass in the string because I'm going to abstract this function away from the underlying DOM event, which I think is probably a better practice anyway. And I'll say like new cell value is a string. Okay, so what do we want to do with this? Well, when someone types into the input, we want to update the current cell value with the new cell value. Now, unfortunately, we don't know what index they're trying to update, right? So what we'll have to do is we're going to have to also pass in the index that they're trying to modify. And I'll just put that as a second argument here. And we could just also say like this is the index and that's a number. So now when they try to modify a particular element of this array, we know what index they're modifying. So for example, they're modifying C over here. We know we can go to index 2, ID of 2, and just modify that. So how do you update an array in React? So I'm going to do set cells, and I'll say previous array or previous cells like this. And we're actually going to return, I'll say previous cells.map. This is a little trick you can do if you need to update things in place. You do a map over it. And then I'm going to go ahead and say cell. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do an if statement. And actually, I don't need to do an if statement. I could do a ternary. I'll just return. And then I'll say, actually, let me go ahead and put an I here. Sorry, this is getting a little bit complex. I'll probably try to delete some stuff to make it simpler. But okay. You call set cells, you pass it the callback function so you can modify the previous array. And then for the previous array, you map over it. For every cell, you get the index. And then I'm going to say if the I is equal to index, then I'm going to say new cell value. Otherwise, I'll just say cell. And so I'm going to clean up some of this code to make it a little bit easier to read, in my opinion. There. Don't know if that's easier to read, but it's less code. So this is probably, if you're a beginner, this is probably super confusing. Okay, but this is a strategy you can do in React to update elements in place. You basically loop over every element, and you're only looking for the index that we care about, right? The index over here, which I should probably rename to like index to update. That would make it a little bit clearer to see what's going on. And this one I'll just rename to like index. So if we've looped over it and we're at the current index that we're trying to update, then replace the value with a new cell value. Otherwise, just use the old value. Okay. So let's make sure this works. I should be able to say E. I should do B, A. That works, but now the inputs are really messed up. They're like going off the page. They have a really large width. I think input has like a width of 140 by default. So let's go to the cell, and I'm going to style the inputs. And I want to give this a width of like 10 pixels and see if that fixes our issue. And it looks like it does. But what I also want to do is I want to make it look like the picture, right? How do I make it look like a picture? Well, I could just remove the background. I think I could just say background none. I could probably give the text a color of white. And then the border, I could say none. And there we have it. Now it's still good to have it so when you actually click on it, you can see what's going on. And then probably also like a cursor could be a pointer so that you know it's interactable if you hover over this thing. There you have it. And you could also put the border as like something more faint. Like I said, like 1 pixel. Let's say dashed, and I'll say like, I'll do like a gray. Okay, I know it's not exactly like the picture, but I guess it's good enough. Okay, so let's take it a step further. So now it's the other part of the problem. I think we solved this one where you can update the individual cells, where it says user should be able to click and edit the input. I don't think I really explained that well when I started this video, but that's something that I wanted to be done. But now I want to be able to click in between these cells, and I want to basically add a new element. How do you do that? So somehow we have to know if the user is near the edge, right? This might be a little bit confusing to you. And honestly, I don't think I've done this before, so this is going to be a new challenge for me as well. One thing we could potentially do is when we render out this cell and we do the map, we could potentially put a hidden thing here inside of each cell, either to the left or to the right. I think in our case, we could probably just put it to the right. There might be a way to do it in CSS with like an after pseudo selector and give the pseudo selector an ID, then do all this other stuff. But I'm just going to add like a hidden element here. It's going to be a span. And we're going to basically just, right now I'll say plus and see if it shows up. Okay, so we got like this plus thing that shows up. And even if you're like, let's say you're in a real interview and you don't know how to do this, like you can't figure this out, don't get too caught up on it. What you could actually do is say like, look, I don't know how to get this thing to be right here and to be hidden. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add the functionality. The first thing is I want to get rid of this. I don't want this thing at the end because the problem statement says only in between. So how do you get rid of the very last one at the very last index? Well, I could do a conditional and say if index is equal to cells.length minus 1, then you can show it. So I'll just do this. Actually, that's not right. I'm going to say if it's less than cells.length minus 1. I think that's how you could potentially do it. So only show the plus if it's one of the ones in between. Okay. So again, if you don't know how to do that, don't get too caught up on it. Just focus on the things you do know how to solve. Like, if I click on this thing, how do I have it add an element? So let's do that. On the span itself, I'm going to add an on click. And I'm going to say handle plus clicked. Okay, I'm just going to make a function here. And we probably also need to pass this the index location as to where we clicked. So I'm going to pass an index, and this is just some insider trading that I know because I've been coding for a while. I know like the solutions kind of in my head before I start coding them. So I'm going to pass in the index number, and we need to basically take the number that was passed in, and let's say, for example, it's 0. Then we need to add in a new element right after index 0. So what I'm going to do is I think we could potentially use like slice to add in new elements. I'm going to try this out. I'm going to say set cells, and I'm going to say previous cells. And we want to say previous cells.slice. We want to start at 0, and we want to end which I don't remember if end is including or not. It might not include. This is exclusive of the element at end. So it's not going to include the end index. So we do want to include it. So I'm going to say idx plus 1. And then we're going to append this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say like, I'm going to push in an empty array that has like an underscore in it. And then I want to push in another one. You know, I'm making this too complicated. What we could do is we could just do a spread operator. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And then we're going to push in an empty underscore. And then we're going to also say previous cells dot slice starting at index plus 1 and just kind of do that. So that should hopefully, if I had this logic right, and it might take a couple of tries to get it right because off by 1 errors are like a real thing in programming. That should take all the elements up to an index. And then it should also take all the elements after the index and then put a underscore. There might actually be a way to do this differently. It looks like it's working fine. All right, and if you look at here, there's actually a splice method you can use. Instead of slice, you can use splice, but that's going to modify the array. I don't think we want to modify the original array. We could probably slice it and then splice it would be more proper. But you basically pass it your start index. I'm sorry, you pass the index that you want to add something in at. You pass what you want to delete. In our case, you say 0, and then you pass in the elements you want to insert. Yeah, this is a little verbose. Yeah, there's probably a better way to do this, but this works, right? We've proven that it works, so let's just focus on it. So that's how you can do it. Now, how do you get this plus sign to be in the middle of these things, right? Remember, we don't know how to do that. So let's go and we can just go ahead and add a class here. I'll call it plus, and we're going to style that thing. I'm going to say plus, and we're going to say, when you hover over this thing, your cursor is going to become a pointer. And I want this thing to be a height of like 50 pixels as well, so that I can hover over the entire thing. And then I want to basically say when you hover over it, I want to make it display of... Actually, I think I'm going to make it hidden. I'm going to make... What do I actually want to do? Do I want to hide the plus symbol here? Or do you want to make it show up? I think what I might do is I'm going to go ahead and just give this like a... Okay, so now let's actually try to give this like a position of absolute, and then I'm going to give it a right of 0 pixels, and let's see what happens. Oh, sorry, not absolute. Let's give it relative, I guess. Let's look at this real quick. So actually, I think I do want absolute, but in order to do absolute, we want to give the cell a position of relative. This is like a little CSS thing you have to do. The parent has to be relative, so you can give children absolutes. That'll move it to the right. We also want to just give this like a -10 to push it into the right location. Okay. And then at this point, it has the correct height, I think. Let's just go ahead and hover over this. So it's the correct thing, but I think the z index needs to be pulled up a little bit. I'm going to give a z index of 1. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to give this plus. I'm going to say when you hover over it, I'm going to say the background is going to be a red, green, blue alpha, red, green, blue, and I'm going to give this an alpha 3. Okay. So now we don't even need like the plus. And again, I'm kind of like doing some ad lib here because the problem statement didn't like give information as to like what it should look like inside. In fact, I think I do need to give this some type of like internal content. So I'll give it an empty space. Actually, I don't know where my thing just went. Yeah, it's weird. If you give it a space, it doesn't show up. Let me try doing an at nbsp and see if it shows up there. Okay, so the issue is that I don't have some width. I need some actual width on this thing. So I'll give like 10 pixels. There. So again, this wasn't really in the problem statement of like doing the green. But if you can show your creativity and do like ad lib and say like, you know, I can think outside the box, I can do my own thing. And this is probably a better user experience of like, you need to show the user that something's going to happen here. You could even have some like text or label pop up saying like add entry. So now when I click it, it actually adds an entry. I can keep on doing this. Pretty cool. Now, the last part of the section was add a button that takes the contents of the array and just combines them and displays them somewhere. Now, technically, you don't even need a button to do this. Like, we've already kind of stressed your knowledge with the on-click listener. Really, what we're trying to see is, like, do you know how to make a derived variable here that says, like, combined string? And can you use that derived and display it? So I'm going to go ahead and say, like, cells, and then I'm going to go ahead and just join them all together like that. And then we want to display this somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and underneath the cells themselves, I'll just display combined string. And there you have it. So like, this is how you can basically, let me restart. I'm going to go ahead and just change this to C, E, exclamation mark, add one, type in G. So that kind of solves the problem. Again, this is just a problem I made up off the top of my head because I think it stresses arrays pretty well. Like, how do you modify arrays with React? A lot of new information in this video that's kind of important to understand, in my opinion. And it also stresses your knowledge of like some CSS, some display, some hover states, stuff like that. We could take it even a step further and like do more things with this, but I think this is a good enough stopping point. I think this challenge was pretty fun. We're like 25 minutes in, so I hope you guys learned something from watching this. If you guys ever have like your own personal React challenge you want to watch me try to solve that, you know, will take 20-30 minutes, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to maybe do one in the future. Otherwise, I have a Discord channel that you're welcome to join if you want to talk to me directly, or just find a place to kind of ask questions to other developers. And I have a newsletter that you're welcome to subscribe to, where I send out some random web dev articles and tips and tricks every week. At least I'm trying to. It's hard to stay motivated to do that. And like always, have a good day and happy coding.